Let's talk about the Sony 400mm f2.8 G Master lens for wildlife photography. Hey guys, I hope you're all doing well. It's been about a month since I made a video on this channel, and I want to thank all of you who are subscribers here, and especially those of you who recently subscribed, for sticking around and being patient. It hasn't just been the global situation that has been getting in the way. I've also been totally overhauling my studio that I'm in right now, as well as my entire workflow for how I shoot and edit videos. And the good news is that I've done this so that I can speed things up. So I will now be able to crank out stuff a lot faster than I did before, and that's great because I've got a lot of stuff that I want to share with you guys. I've got a long queue of content, so thanks for your patience. I'm back, and look for more stuff coming soon. So this video is about the Sony 400GM, and it came about because Jeff Walker commented on one of my previous videos, my most recent video before this one, and asked if I could do a review of this lens. And I said, for sure, I can do that. Now, I don't do reviews in the way that most people typically do gear reviews, I think. I certainly try to do them differently. I don't really talk a lot about the technical specs, now, even though those are things that I'm interested in, and I think that you should be interested in those things and you should consider those whenever you're making a purchasing decision. But in the end, I think what matters mostly is the overall experience of using a particular piece of equipment, and that's really what I want to share with you in this discussion. So let's talk about this lens. So firstly, the 400mm GM is a very important lens, and it was a significant release when Sony made it available in late 2018, in September 2018. So until that time, I think there were a number of people who probably were looking at Sony and saying, well, I can't really take this system, this platform seriously. I can't use it seriously because there are no long primes available. And they were waiting and waiting, and in fact Sony took about 8 years before, so they released their first camera with the E-mount system on the market in 2010. So they released this lens in 2018, so it took them 8 years to make that release. And about a year before they released this lens, they released the 100 to 400. So even it still took like 7 years even to get a lens even with 400mm out there at all. So you could argue that during that time they were figuring out how to make really good lenses, because since they have released this lens, which is a fantastic lens, they've released many other GM or G Master lenses, and pretty much all of them are superb lenses. So this lens was released in September 2018. I purchased mine in early 2019. One thing that's interesting is that so at the time that Sony released this lens, it was the lightest, possibly also the smallest, but certainly the lightest 400 f2.8 full frame lens for about 3 months. And then Canon released a lens, which was the third version of their 400 f2.8, and it was 55 grams lighter and 16mm shorter. So the competition is always a good thing. I always say that, and clearly that was the case with this lens. So let me tell you about why I was interested in this lens. So the first thing is that 400mm is, for me, it's an ideal focal length for the kind of wildlife shooting I do. Now, I made a video previously about how I believe you should try to consider your style of wildlife photography when you are figuring out what kind of long lens to purchase. Because most of us only have enough money, and certainly it's pretty hard to travel. Most of us only have enough money for one long lens, and it's pretty hard to travel with more than one long lens. So you're only going to typically have one, and it's a pretty important purchasing decision. But the thing is that, you know, some people say, for example, 400mm is a sports lens. It's not a real wildlife lens, and I think that's ridiculous. It totally depends on what kind of shooting that you're doing, what kind of subject you're shooting, how close you're getting to those subjects, and what kind of images you want to produce. I have plenty of images taken with the 400 where 400mm, even without a teleconverter, was too tight. Heck, I've got images taken with a 135 or a 24mm focal length, which are two other prime focal lengths that I use quite often, and in many cases they were too tight as well. So 400 is ideal for me. The other thing is that f2.8 is something that I really value. I really value that large aperture for low light. I shoot a lot in low light, and especially when you're shooting with a camera like the A7R4, which I shoot with a lot, the higher pixel density of that camera means that the high ISO performance is not as great, so having the large aperture is helpful. Also, obviously, for subject isolation, also f2.8 is fantastic as well. Now, the other thing is that the weight and the size of this lens really interested me. Those of you who subscribe to this channel know that I'm a big fan of hand holding and not being constrained by a tripod or a monopod, and I shoot handheld pretty much all the time, so I want something that I can easily handhold and move around with and that doesn't slow me down. I also travel a lot for my wildlife photography, so I need something that is easy to travel with. So I bought the lens, and let me tell you about the things that have really impressed me with this lens. So the first thing is that, yeah, the optics are fantastic. It's a super sharp lens, fantastic detail and resolution. All of the Sony G Master lenses are supposed to be good for up to about 100 megapixel sensors. So this is a good investment in the future. The lens has not only great detail, great sharpness, and great contrast, but it has it throughout the lens, in the middle and at the corners, and that is really what you would expect with a lens of this kind of cost. The second thing is that, yes, it's light and it's small for what it is, but the thing that's great is that Sony designed the lens so that it's really well balanced. So they put a lot of the weight at the back of the lens here so that it's not front heavy, and that makes it fairly easy to handhold. And I'm not a really strong person, but this thing is really easy to handhold. You know, sometimes I'll come across someone and they'll say, my gosh, you know, how can you be hand-holding that thing? And I'm like, it's actually, not only is it not that heavy, but it also is very well balanced. The other thing is that the performance with the teleconverters has been, for the most part, great. Now I say for the most part because with the 1.4x teleconverter, it's fantastic. No concerns there at all. Very little, if any, image quality degradation at all. Now with the 2x teleconverter, I haven't had as much luck, and I've shot with it, you know, every now and then, but I really try to avoid it generally, and I find that you need a lot of light, not just because of the smaller aperture, but I just generally find that to get, you know, reasonable level of detail with that teleconverter, you really got to have a lot of light, like almost harsh light. So that's my experience. But I shoot mostly with it wide open, but when I shoot with the 1.4x teleconverter, I'm very, very happy. So overall, super impressed with this lens and very happy with it. Now, of course, there's always room for improvement, so let's talk about some of those things. The first thing is that, like most big lenses, this thing has a big, rigid lens hood at the front here. And that's what you want. You want protection for this lens because it has a front element for which you cannot get a screw-in filter, and if anything happens to this front element, it's not going to be good. So you really want to have protection. But the thing is that this lens hood design, it's it's typical of these lens hoods. It screws on with just one screw here. It's clumsy to get this thing on and off in a hurry, and it would be great to see a more well-considered design. If you've seen any of the Olympus lens hoods, they're fairly interesting because they're collapsible, like on their 300mm f4. Now, I don't know whether a design like that would scale up to a lens hood this big, but it'd be interesting for someone to put some thought into that. I have tried some of the collapsible lens hoods that you can get for this lens, and none of them really worked fairly well, which is sort of not surprising. So I have stuck with that lens hood, but it would be great if they had something that was easy to put on and take off, and perhaps had some kind of a collapsible design. Another thing is that the lens foot on this lens, the one that comes with the lens, which is not this one, it doesn't have an Arca Swiss mount on it, which is, for me, that's what I use on all my ball heads and gimbal heads. And also, the original lens foot comes down to about here. So it makes the lens taller. So I wanted something that had a lower profile, that also reduced a bit of the weight, and that had Arca Swiss built in, because then of course if I had the original lens foot on there and then I had to put an Arca Swiss plate on it, that would even increase the profile even more. So the one that I ended up getting is the lens foot replacement that I ended up getting is a Wimberley product. I'll just throw it up here. It's the AP609. And I'm very, very happy with it. So it works fairly well. The other thing is that like most big lenses, like many big lenses, this lens comes with a hard case. It's a hard case that I've not used once. I can't even show it to you because it's in a cupboard somewhere behind lots of other boxes. That case is useless to me. I would not be putting the lens in a case and traveling with it and checking it in as checked luggage. One of the reasons for having this lens is that I can travel with it in carry-on luggage. And I've made some other videos showing how I've done that with how I can fit this lens with a camera body in all of the bags that I use. So that hard case is useless to me. I've never used it once. And what would be great if instead of that hard case that they would release it with some kind of a soft case which would accommodate the lens, help to let you carry the lens and a camera body. That would be fantastic. Now, let's talk about images, because whenever anyone reviews camera gear, whether it's a camera body or camera lens, you sort of expect that they're going to show you some images. And I'm happy to show you some images, and I will. But the thing is, one thing that I really want you to consider is that you shouldn't be led astray whenever anyone shows you images taken with a piece of camera gear, because every image is produced as the result of a combination of the opportunity, the photo opportunity, the skill of the photographer, and the tools. And don't be led astray into thinking that if you see a fantastic image that it's entirely because of the gear. But we can certainly look at some images just to show you the kinds of images that this lens has helped me to take. So let me throw the iPad up here. Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 albums. Now, I've taken thousands of images with this lens. It's my most used lens, and if you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, I post typically each day, and I usually say which lens and which camera I took the photo with, and most of the time you'll see that I'm using the 400 f2.8. So I'm going to show you 3 albums. The first one is this album here, and just showing you in Lightroom here some of the images that I've taken with the 400mm lens without the teleconverter. So most of these are taken at f2.8, and let me show you these in full screen. So at f2.8, although some of them, you'll see here, for example, this was taken at f4.5, this one was taken at f4.5, this one was taken at f5.6, even though I didn't have the teleconverter on, and that's because I wanted a greater depth of field because I had multiple subjects that I was dealing with in the image. But all of these images are definitely, I was helped by the fact that I had this lens. And what I try to tell people when they're choosing their lens, their long lens that suits their style of wildlife photography, is that you really have to consider what kind of images you're trying to shoot. So for me, there's a certain kind of things that I do, like I shoot a lot in low light. I often get pretty close physically to the animals. So this is a lens that works for me, and often I'm just using it without the teleconverter. So let's look at some of the images now with the teleconverter. So these were taken with the 1.4x teleconverter. So this is at 560 millimeters, typically at f4. And I'm going through these pretty quickly too, because the thing is that everything I'm showing you is actually on my website. So if you go to the gear test section on my website, adrianchophotography.com, you'll see all of these images there. And of course, the other thing is that whenever you're seeing images in a video like this, you're watching a video at 1080p, and so you can only get so much in terms of resolution out of that video. And so finally, let's look at some images taken with the 2x teleconverter. Some of these ones here were taken with the A7R III or the A9, as were some of the previous images I showed you. So some of the previous images I showed you weren't necessarily all taken with the A7R IV. So these are all with a 2x teleconverter. And so just as an example, right, like if we go right in, you'll see the detail is actually very good, right? But what I've found is that it's not consistent. I can't get consistent results with a 2x teleconverter. If I put it on, I know there's a possibility it might not be stellar. And that's sort of what I expect from this lens. Typically the bar is really high, right? I expect really stellar results. Okay, so I hope you found those images helpful in terms of just giving you an idea of what is possible with this lens. And what we want to do now is actually just sort of give you my final thoughts. And so overall, I think this lens is just a fantastic piece of equipment. For me, it really suits my style of shooting. It is, typically you could say it's my weapon of choice, right? Like it's, most of the time I'm reaching for this lens. Wildlife is often far away, so I actually try to shoot with shorter lenses as much as I can. I often shoot with 135 or 24, but for sure the 400 is what I use the most, and often also I will typically start with the 400, and sometimes I'm able to get in closer, or the wildlife comes closer to me, and then I can go for a shorter lens, but I'll typically start with a 400. As I mentioned before, if you want to see the images that I just showed you or any other images, go to my website and you'll see all the ones that I showed you and others. And if you wanted to see other images, also you can check out my work on Instagram or Facebook if you don't already follow me there. So that's it in terms of my thoughts on this lens. I hope that you found this this discussion helpful and informative, and I want to again thank you for being patient with me at this channel and sticking around if you are a subscriber. As I said, I've revamped my process now, and I'm looking forward to pushing out a lot more content. Now, when I roll the closing sequence for this video in a second, you're going to see something new that I've not had on any previous video. And what it is, it's a link to a space where I'm hoping to be able to engage with you and with other people about wildlife photography, to hang out and chat about wildlife photography. And I do enjoy answering questions and taking your feedback in the comments here on these YouTube videos, and I get a lot of people who contact me through other channels like Facebook Messenger or Instagram DMs or on email, and I enjoy all those methods of communication, but I thought that it would be interesting to try as a bit of an experiment a space where I can engage with you and with other people, and that we can share information, because lots of things I would love to share with you, but I would also really like to learn from you guys as well. So you'll see the link come up when I run the closing sequence. If you go there and you're one of the first people there, you'll find that there's nothing there right now. It's because I haven't told anyone else about this. You guys are the first to find out about it. So we're going to start small there, and we'll see how it goes. So anyway, thanks for watching. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.